This is AIM Agenda. Thanks very much for your company. With me now, Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Kelly O'Dwyer, and Labor frontbencher, Nick Champion. Good morning to you both. Kelly, first to you on this report that I started the program with. Apparently, the leadership group of the government discussed the implications of splitting the higher education bill 3 weeks ago and whether or not that would still constitute a double dissolution trigger. Last night, Laurie Oakes reported that the cabinet ministers discussed it at a dinner. The prospect of an early double dissolution election that was discussed on Monday night, reported again this morning by Peter Hartcher. Is this a serious consideration here from the government?
Well, Kieran, I'm not in the leadership group, I'm not in the cabinet, so I can't give you any personal insights into what was discussed in these meetings. But what I would say is we're focused on actually getting on with the job of doing government and ensuring that we have sensible policy that is introduced. We're being fought every step of the way by the Labor Party, who are now delegating their responsibilities to crossbenchers in the Senate. It's very unfortunate that we're not able to embark upon the sort of structural reform that we need to make sure that our budget is going to be sustainable into the future. And I think that this wrecking policy of the Labor Party is one that will come back to haunt them.
So what would you say, though, if this was being considered? Do you think it's a reasonable consideration?
Well, look, I think it's sensible for us to focus on continuing on with the job of government, not to be looking for double dissolution triggers. We need to be focused on the task at hand. That's what the Australian people expect of us. That was the job that we were elected to do. We're trying to get on with the job of ensuring that our economy will continue to grow, that business will be able to employ, that we have the right tax settings in place. That's why we're about to introduce a new tax white paper. We've got a Federation white paper under review at the moment. The Labor Party has the opportunity right now to enter into some of these key discussions about the great national challenges that face us as a nation. Instead of actually reading the intergenerational report, they poo-pooed the report before it was even released.
That is true, Nick Champion. That was being criticised before it was released. I guess the question to you on a double dissolution or an early election, it would catch Labor flat-footed because you don't really have much to speak of in terms of policies.
Well, look, this is a desperate Prime Minister on top of a divided government, and now we know he's desperately sort of grasping around for a reason to go to the polls. But if the government wants to go to the polls, then I think most Australians would welcome that opportunity, and I think the Labor Party would welcome that opportunity to rid this country of what has been a terrible government that has performed, well below the expectations that the Australian people set for it. So if they want an election, bring it on. Bring it on.
In terms of the budget, though, the Prime Minister says within 5 years it's going to be broadly in balance. That's true, isn't it?
Well, the government's budget strategy has lurched between sort of this, talking of emergencies and this sort of hyperventilating, I think, on the challenges we face as a nation. And then the next thing you know, everything's all right and it's going to be a dull budget. Now, this government's been sending out mixed messages, sometimes doom and gloom, sometimes everything's all right. And that's produced confusion amongst consumers, amongst business groups, amongst the general public, and guess what? That's affected economic growth. So we see that in every survey. You only have to walk down, any strip mall in the country to find that sentiment. And what people most want is certainty, and they're not likely to get it from this government.
Does the Prime Minister's argument stack up in terms of the trajectory of the budget when he says within 5 years it'll be in balance? When the last week or so we've had
it won't be in balance.
Well, he said broadly in balance within 5 years is the words, the other words that he used. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, the first point to make is that the people who have described the budget as having a crisis were actually former advisors to the Labor Party, Dr Edwards, who was appointed by Wayne Swan to the Reserve Bank Board. He was Paul Keating's advisor. He actually said that we do have a crisis with our budget. We've seen Martin Parkinson, we have seen the new Treasury Secretary, and we have seen Glenn Stevens all talk about the need for structural reform, all talk about the fact that we are spending far too much money given the revenue that we bring in. We're spending beyond our means, which is leading us to have an ever-increasing structural deficit. Now, this is a big problem.
But the Prime Minister's quite sanguine about it now.
Well, look, let me tell you, we shouldn't be sanguine about the position that we're in as a country. The intergenerational report was very, very clear that while we are on a better trajectory than the one that Labor set us on, so it is going to be half of the net debt that Labor put us on, it is still going to be comparable to the levels of Spain in 2054, 2055, and that currently assumes some pretty robust assumptions, which is firstly that there's not going to be a slowing in growth or an economic shock, secondly that we're not going to need new spending, and thirdly that we're going to continue for 15 years not to return bracket creep to people, which you know, all three of those assumptions are very big assumptions. It assumes uninterrupted economic growth, you know, for the next 40 odd years.
Well, the bracket creep would have obviously adverse effects on the economy, on productivity, and all the rest of it. Nick, in terms of the
that's why Labor actually needs to engage in this conversation about economic reform,
well, I guess,
about tax reform.
Well, I'll get to Nick in a moment, but just to pursue your suggestion as well that we shouldn't be sanguine. Do you think that the Prime Minister is guilty of some, I guess, of mixed messages here? On the one hand, saying that we've got this budget intergenerational problem, but then saying, oh, this is going to be a dull budget. Surely you need to continue the reform or keep your foot on the pedal, as Arthur Sinodina says.
He's continuing to say that we need to prosecute the case for structural reform. He's highlighted that Labor have been obstructionists to this reform. But I don't think anybody is in any doubt that that is the job that we were elected to do, to fix the budget, to get it back under control, to make sure that we can continue to grow the economy by getting the policy settings right that encourage incentives. Lowering taxes is what we should be doing, not increasing taxes.
Are you worried that some of the...
to make sure that businesses have the confidence to grow and employ.
Are you worried that some of the senior figures in your government are wavering a bit on that intent? Because, as you say, it was a pretty clear promise.
Well, look, I don't see any wavering with my colleagues on the clear need to address our structural budget problems.
Right, Nick Champion, your reaction to that? Kelly adamant that it still needs to be addressed, and she's not alone, as you know. Sol Estlake, respected economists right across the board this morning, saying that this has got to be dealt with.
And that's one of the reasons when we were in government we did very significant savings measures, things like means testing the private health insurance rebate, which saved the budget billions. The opposition opposed it, the then opposition opposed it every step of the way. It took us years to get it through, and of course every year that it didn't go through cost the budget. So, you know, we had significant savings when we were in government. We'll do so again, and Chris Bowen's indicated that we'll set down our policy parameters and our budget parameters closer to the election, as you would expect that we would. But the government's problem is essentially they want to load all of that pain of structural reform onto the poorest and the least able to afford it in the election. And you only have to look at their priorities, taking $6,000 off working families, slugging them $7 every time they go to a GP surgery, every time they get a blood test, every time they get a blood scan. And we're now at Mark 4 of the GP co-payment. So we're still not sure about what that policy is. Every doctor's surgery across the country with a question mark over their billing procedures. So, you know, what we have is a government that sort of started out all macho, is now retreating at a rate of knots. We've got a Prime Minister who's you know, pretty desperate to go to the polls to head off a challenge to him, and he's desperate to head off the Liberal Party party room, arriving at a consensus about who will take over from him. I mean, that's the race that's on at the moment. The Prime Minister's racing towards the polls, and his successors are racing to get a majority in the Liberal Party party room. That's what's going on. We've got all sorts of people, you know, the Foreign Minister, the Communication Minister, all auditioning for the role of
on the
Prime
higher
Minister.
Education reforms. The front page of the Australian reports that Jackie Lambie and David Leyonhjelm had only met with the Prime Minister twice in the last 18 months. Given the nature of this negotiation, I remember many times in the Howard years, he would come in at the 11th hour, do a deal and get it done. The Prime Minister didn't even try to come and negotiate himself.
Well, look, again, I don't have any insight into how the Prime Minister's office directly works on these particular issues, but I certainly know that ministers have responsibility for negotiating their legislation through the Senate, and quite rightly the Prime Minister gives them authority to take on those negotiating positions. Now, the Prime Minister's got plenty to do without getting involved in every single piece of negotiation. Prime Minister is able to negotiate when it's important to do so, and he's been available to do that when the need has arisen.
Well, I guess the comparison has been made with Julia Gillard, who would meet regularly with the crossbench.
I'm not sure we're holding her out as the world's best Prime Minister.
She was a
though,
very good negotiator, though. Very good negotiator in a hung Parliament.
Well,
whatever you
when
say,
you continue to
whatever your
other
critique
people's
about
money,
her,
it's pretty easy,
whatever
isn't
your
it?
critique about her, she was a very good negotiator. Very good negotiator in the circumstances that she was handled. But look, this desperate Prime Minister, the reason why he can't meet with the senators is because he's too busy kind of trying to corral a majority in his own party. That's the problem here. And we all know the unsettled division that exists at the moment. And look, you know,
Well,
maybe I've got a little bit of post-trauma in these things, but you see it. You know it when you see it. Journalists know it when they see it. You know it when you see it. This is a divided government. They can't make up their mind about how to manage the budget, and they can't make up their mind about how to manage themselves. And we've got a Prime Minister who's going to run to the polls. He's going to run to the polls as quick as he can.
Nick Champion, Kelly O'Dwyer, it's good to see you both.
Great to see you
Have a
too.
good day. Quick break on AM Agenda. Back with the Shadow Finance Minister, Tony Burke.